Hello, in this video I want to talk about a bit about everyday wellness, but more focus on a perceptual and psychological process associated with psychological energy, something I've termed just combining an additional aspect and more unifying concepts associated with mental energy and getting away from more of that clinical understanding of psychological functions that are more based on this traditional model that has more to do with clinical cases rather than looking at human experience more generally and looking at, for example, personality characteristics and how personality is situated to our well-being. So it incorporates this psychological as well as this perceptual process that's direct to everyday living, and so it's involving more than serotonin, for example, that's implicated in a variety of various mental disorders and psychiatric conditions, and also within various processes that are occurring pertaining to perception and psychology that span from various disciplines of study such as philosophy of mind, psychology, and the mind sciences as well as the behavior sciences. And I want to talk about psychology more in this view of it as, starting from a philosophical point of view, that it's based in perception and psychophysiology in particular, rather than focusing particularly on that psychological process. So I'm talking about something that's direct to what we can know and the meaning that we're processing. And so it involves GABA, it involves glutamate, it involves all the neurotransmitters and various hormones in our body. It's based off these mind-body environment constituencies too. So you can think of even oxygen as well as the hydrogen in our body, also the water that's within blood and composing various compounds that provides a source of energy and resources that we metabolize, and which impact our psychological processes as well as our perceptions, such as whether or not we feel tired, and also our level of motivation. And that's very, very important, because part of what's going to impact our well-being is going to be all these different constituents. And when we're looking at various perceptual or psychological processes or even physiological processes that involve these various situated personality characteristics and states associated with psychological functioning, such as, for example, perception, motivation, emotion, feeling, actions, and behavior. And then, just to give you an example there, maybe you're making a decision and then you're accessing your memory, you're forming these associations in your brain, you're solving potentially a complex problem in the environment, and that can manifest through innovative behaviors and actions and positive emotions, as well as positive affect, which is more that pertains to that feeling dimension and subjective well-being. And this is being impacted through constituencies that are formed from the mind-body environment that are associated with perception, like serotonin, and that, like, especially if you're more wakeful, norepinephrine, epinephrine, or you can think of that as adrenaline and non-adrenaline. And your perception is being modulated to some degree by serotonin and acetylcholine, which is mediating more of the novelty of that, and also direct to the neurological constituency there that has to do with the transmission from more of a neuroscientific point of view that extends. By the way, there's a more of a common misconception, I think, when people are approaching psychology, that psychology is mostly in the head. And it's not. It's actually, when we're referring to the mind, it's not just the head, it's embodied, and it's throughout the body. It spans from the head all the way throughout us, right? And that's direct to behaviors and forming these constituencies. So when you're solving a problem too, it's going to activate various regions in your body, such as the resources that you're metabolizing, and this is going to regulate that psychological energy associated with that problem solving. So that involves various problems, such as this innovative, like if you're engaging in an innovative behavior and activity, then there's going to be more of this creative operation that's going to be associated with GABA, dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, as well as norepinephrine. Epinephrine has all these neurotransmitters within it, and then they can have various other hormones that are impacting it to various different degrees. And oftentimes we also see another hormone I've talked about that has a pretty big impact on neurotransmitter, and that's brain-derived neurotrophic factor and nerve growth factor that are associated with that learning-dependent perception plasticity. and it's impacting us at that neuroplastic level and producing these changes that also regulate inflammation in the body, say with even capillaries, which is associated with that blood flow, and which particularly there's also a release of another hormone that usually is released with brain-derived neurotropic factor, nerve trope factor, called vascular epithelial growth factor, and that has to do with the nutrient increasing the cell walls on the capillaries and the walls on the blood vessels, and allowing for greater transmission and flowing of blood and oxygen, primarily through nutrient absorption, and improving that process. And that's producing positive effects on perception, our psychological processes, as well as our physiological processes. And then we have this unifying constituency of the perceptual, psychological, and physiological, and that can mediate and moderate, so impact the efficacy and effect of various transmissions within the body and processes occurring within perception, our psychology, our physiology, and the constituency there between our perceptions and psychophysiology that impacts our well-being, and that also ultimately regulates psychological energy. So our degree, say, of wakefulness or cognizance and even recognition are going to be associated with this psychological energy and how we're regulating it in the body. And various wellness perceptions, motivations, emotions, feelings, actions, and behaviors, as well as these situated personality characteristics, and also what we perceive as meaning in its various forms, empirical, perceptual, and synthetic, as well as what's relevant to forming knowns and knowledge, as well as learning as active through engagement in various components direct to perception, in which we can render or parse out information within these broader situated contexts, and form these relations and establish knowledge and greater self-knowledge that ultimately regulates psychological energy, which is an energizing metabolism of these various nutrients within our you can think of it as a nutritional consciousness, in which is converting this psychological energy into a perceptual energy, and which is in parsimony. So it's not necessarily separate, but it's part of this processing perceptual self-processing, expressing wellness infrastructure, and that's direct to our wellness infrastructure and regulating our well-being in association with our energy that's compiled throughout the perceptual, psychological, and physiological process in this perceptual, psychophysiological, psychological energy, and which is direct to things like psychological stimulation, also engaging in physical activity and exercise, that sense of wakefulness that we get, and various activities that are operating in the body to produce those different perceptions, motivations, emotions, feelings, actions, behaviors, also the meaning that we perceive, what we find meaningful, operate various personality characteristics, their processes, expressions, what we're situated to in these very state-like conditions, what underlies our strengths, our signature strengths, and learned skills, also learned knowledge, what we know, knowledge processes, self-intelligence, and then various functions, pretty much everything that functions under that, like self-regulation, our capacity for self-acceptance, self-care, and self-compassion, as well as our competencies and what we find intrinsically meaningful. So our motivations, particularly our psychological motivations and positive psychological motivations, that jive right there with our positive, psychologically sustainable wellness infrastructure that is indistinguishable from this, to some degree. Well, it's not. To some degree, it's direct to the perceptual, self-processing, expressing wellness infrastructure, but we also have a surrounding component too. So it operates in reciprocal relation to it, to that, and it's the self is encompassing of that. So while it's not the self directly, it's on the periphery of the self and pertains more to that surrounding component, and then also the self. within self. And that is directly connected to a topic I'll be talking about in upcoming videos, which has to do more with the local surroundings and also how we can think of the environmental surroundings, forming more of these connections between the mind, body, environment constituencies. And I hope you enjoyed that little blurb on psychological energy. I'll be talking more about it, and particularly on regulating it and how that's directly associated with psychological sustainability going forward. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Bye.